Hello, welcome to Policy Watch. This week, we focus on the improvement in IIP numbers for the month of January. The data has been released and a slight recovery seems in industrial production, seems to have industry in good spirits. We also talk about yet another allegation of wrongdoing in the financial sector with yet another expose which has accused three leading banks of compliance in turning black money into white. My guest this week is Dr. Soumyakanti Ghosh from leading think tank ICRIER. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ghosh. Before Soumya and I start the discussion, let's get you the headlines first. Industrial production numbers from January show improvement. IIP grows by 2.4% after falling in the previous 2 months. Three leading banks accused of letting money laundering go unchecked. Banks promise action if any wrongdoing is proved. National Aluminium Company of Nalco shares divested, government expected to rake in over 500 crores from the stake sale. Those are the top stories, and now let's get you a detailed report on the January IIP numbers. Now, in signs of a recovery after a 2-month decline, industrial output in January grew by 2.4% on account of better performance of manufacturing and power sectors. Data was released by the government this week. Krishnanand Tripathi filed this report. Take a look.
Showing green shoots of recovery, industrial production inched up to 2.4% in January, mainly on account of good show by manufacturing and power sectors. The factory output recovered after it contracted by 0.8% in November and 0.5% in December. The manufacturing sector, which constitutes over 75% of the index, grew by 2.7% in January as against 1.1% in the same month last year. Power generation increased by 6.4% in January compared to 3.2% growth in 2012. However, a detailed analysis of the industrial output data shows some worrying signs as well. The production of consumer goods grew by 2.8% in January this year, while production of capital goods declined by 1.8%. India's exports also recorded a growth of 4.23% in February this year. This is the second straight month of growth following 8 months of decline.
Yes, it's encouraging. We were aware of that, but we have to do more, both on exports and the industrial manufacturing.
As per the separate data released on Tuesday, India's consumer price index or retail inflation has marginally hardened to 10.91% in February from 10.79% a month back. This prospect of a weak recovery coupled with high inflation can make it difficult for the central bank to yield to demands for rate cuts to boost growth. RBI governor has already rejected the demands to accept high inflation as new normal. With Krishnanand Tripathi, Neetu Eldos for Rajya Sabha TV.
There you go. Some news, some good news for the industry. It might not be a recovery as such, but surely a positive sign for the economy. After straight 2 months of going down, IIP has slightly recovered, 2.4%.
Surely, 2.4% is some growth rate which we'll think that it's a modest growth rate. It's not a recovery per se, we can say. And how the growth rate will span out over the next couple of months is going to be very, everybody needs to look at the trend. For example, in February, I think the growth rate has to come over a higher base last year. And in March, then base will be negative. So for the next 2 months will be very crucial in terms of a growth rate. And let me remind you one thing over here. If you look at the cumulative growth rate over the entire period, the growth rate is around 1%. So, and the CSO is projecting a growth rate for manufacturing 2% in the current fiscal to have a growth rate of 5%.
Right.
So from that point of view, what is more important is a higher growth rate in February and March, so that we are actually able to reach that 2% target which the government has been projecting. And the other important thing over here, which I think a lot of people are missing out and which is very crucial, is that if you look at the capital goods sector, the average decline in the capital goods has been 12%.
Right.
And if you look at the average, so that is going to be the crucial factor. So going forward, if there is no recovery in the capital goods, it will be very difficult for the industrial recovery to take momentum.
That was going to be my next question. Now, even though top policymakers like Monte Singh Ahluwalia says it's surely a good sign for the economy has bottomed out, the fact remains that calling it a recovery could be slightly stretching it. Now, like you mentioned, capital goods for the third straight month down. Short sign that investment appetite is still quite weak. Also, mining hasn't performed really well at all. Car sales have plunged in February, they've gone down. And to make matters worse, food inflation, old enemy, has come up again. It's 10.9% right now.
Yeah.
So worry, concern there?
See, I mean, if you, absolutely. If you look at the numbers, I mean, if you look at some of the recovery signs bottoming out, I mean, there is a lot of talk about bottoming out. I don't buy that argument fully, but I tend to believe to some extent there has been some amount of bottoming out.
But for example, completely bottomed.
Yeah, but not completely bottomed out. For example, if you look at the capacity utilization, that has recovered after 13 quarters from a new low as per the RBI survey. But at the same time, the capacity utilization numbers which is currently still significantly lower than the last year and even the previous year. That is one thing. Second thing is that everybody, I mean, the players expect the production to improve, but the order book position they do not expect to improve significantly. The profitability is a major concern for the corporates. One interesting trend over here is that if you look at the impact of the rupee depreciation. Rupee has depreciated significantly over the last couple of months. So, there has been a pressure on the imported inflation. Even after that, the imported inflation has actually declined from to around 6% as far the last numbers are concerned. So, that clearly indicates that even for a rupee depreciation, that is not getting translated into imported inflation because the corporates have weak pricing power. So, to say that recovery we are bottoming out, I think it will be too early to say. But yes, there are some numbers which are encouraging. But at the same time, there are also some numbers which show that the recovery may be, I mean, it is going to be more like an U-shaped recovery rather than a V-shaped recovery. Right. Because if you look at the car sales, they are at a new low. If you look at the inflation numbers, I think the last WPI numbers which has come out, the core inflation is around 3.8%. So, that is a new low. So, I think it will give some amount of comfort to the RBI in terms of the inflation numbers. But as far as food inflation is concerned, I think they are still high even though they have declined in the February WPI number.
Prime Minister's economic advisor, P.C. Rangarajan, now he sees, and he's come out with that statement, that he sees a stagflationary trend in the high inflation and low growth that's happening in India for the past 2-3 quarters now. He also says that half-baked reforms haven't really worked, of course referring to the fact that even after multi-brand retail was allowed, investors haven't really shown that fire in that, because of entry-level caveats and what have you. Do we need more big bang reforms? And what about divesting more, especially in sectors like coal?
See, I think to some point of Dr. Rangarajan's argument, I agree, but I don't fully agree with the fact that, I mean, if we have more big bang reforms, that is going to lead to an immediate impact on the growth sentiments. Yes, there has been a conscious effort on the part of the government to play out with some of the reforms in the last 6 to 7 months. That has been encouraging, but how that will translate into ground reality, it's still a matter of question. For example, CapEx, capital expenditure, still at a low. The number of projects which are being cancelled that are still, I mean, or the abundant, that they are also still significantly higher. So, and new project numbers, they are still also not being that high as per if you look at the CMI data. So, I don't believe that there will be an immediate impact, but of course, that will have a soothing impact. And in terms of the disinvestment and all those, that will be, I mean, if you go through the reforms, and that has been the motto of the government, push to some of the reforms so that the markets are buoyant. So, basically, you are able to garner a higher amount to the disinvestment. Right. And that's actually what has been happening recently.
We'll talk about disinvestment a little later in the show. Of course, Nalco has been disinvested. But before that, I want to come to the RBI right now. Now, looking at the numbers right now, inflation CPI is high, 10.9%, way too high for our comfort level. Jan IIP, however, is 2.4% up. Now, does this make the task of the Reserve Bank of India more difficult, with respect to March 19, the interest rate scenario?
What the point which I am trying to make is that if you look at the CPI, RBI, I think as per as my understanding, it follows a multiple indicator approach and CPI is one of them. But if you look at the CPI in isolation, it will not be a correct proposition because CPI has a significant weightage of food items. And in a situation where food prices are rising, CPI will obviously diverge from the WPI. I think what is more important at this point of time, we need to talk about core CPI. Which excludes the volatile items like food and fuel, which is also at higher level, but is around 8.4%. So, we should need to look at that number. And the important point is that in everybody talks about this divergence, but in January 2012, if you remember, when the food prices actually turned negative, WPA and CPI had nearly converged. Right. But today, because of the rising food prices, CPI has increased at a significant level. So, we should not give too much thought to it. There is some room to stimulate growth because core inflation is at 3.8%, manufacturing inflation has declined, food has declined, primary numbers have declined. So, I think there has been a decline in almost all inflation numbers across the board, even though the overall inflation has gone up, and that was expected because now the entire pass-through has been reflected in the WPI. That is a good sense. So, there is no suppressed inflation as such. So, even after taking this suppressed inflation into account, if the number is around 6.8%, I still believe the RBI can act, even though may not to a significant extent, it may take a calibrated approach on March 19.
So, you are saying it is not all gloom and doom on the inflation front.
Yes.
Of course, CPI is high, but the RBI will take the whole picture, the big picture into consideration before they give their answer. Now, what is your outlook really on the March to April quarter? Like, let's say talk about CPI for example. Do you see inflation going higher, runaway, or do you see them moderating? And what are your expectations really on March 19? Do you think a repo rate cut is possible? And what about a CRR cut?
See, I mean, if you ask me properly, I mean, if I am purely by if I go through an economics point of view, I think given the significant deficit on the LAF numbers right now, which actually is around, say, is running more than 1 lakh crore. I think there is a significant justification for injecting some amount of liquidity in the system through CRR or the OMO, which the RBI of course does. And the rate cut, I think at this point of time, that is what I am saying, could be a calibrated approach to the RBI rate cut, because I believe that the inflation numbers which is currently is going to have a downward trajectory over the next couple of months. However, after some point of time, maybe in the second half after September, the inflation rate may increase because the fact that diesel prices, the increase in diesel prices every month is going to add to around 10 basis point to inflation, and also there could be a revision in the electricity tariffs. So I think the RBI, if he wants to act, it needs to act now, given because the window of an inflation decline may not be as significant over the next couple of months.
On that note, Dr. Ghosh, we'll take a small break. We'll come back with the other important top story, of course, that being yet another expose about wrongdoings in the financial sector. That's after the break. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching Policy Watch. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Yet another expose involving the financial sector has shaken the top rungs of leading private banks in the country. An online magazine on the basis of a sting operation conducted over several months has alleged that 3 major banks are involved in channelizing vast amounts of black money into the regular banking system as laundered white money. The magazine's released video footage recorded largely by hidden cameras showing some employees of 3 banks, HDFC, ICICI and Axis Bank, purportedly offering to convert black money into white. The 3 banks in separate statements have denied the charges and said they are ready to investigate if any specific instances are brought to their notice. They also allegedly offered lockers to stash away the black money and offered to open accounts without adhering to RBI guidelines and use Benami accounts to facilitate the conversion of the black money and keep the identity of the depositor a secret. The Finance Ministry has said that it has asked the banks for more details. Now, this is certainly cause for concern, Dr. Ghosh, as the number of employees shown around the country as willing to, bend or even break prescribed norms is rather high. Many employees across many cities have done this, on tapes at least that we've seen. Do you think that this particular expose, like it alleges that the top management of these banks could not be completely ignorant of what's really happening in their banks, or do you think it's largely restricted to individuals and how they act and a generalization can't be made?
Yeah, I think I tend to go with your second point. It's basically it should be a localized event, and it's not always correct to blame the entire bank or like this, because some of the policies, if you look at the guidelines of KYC guidelines in India, they are very strict. In fact, today we have this SEBI, we have IRDA, we have RBI, all have separate KYC guidelines. So today, in fact, for example, if I have to open a mutual fund I have to go through a SEBI. So everybody, there is a separate KYC guideline, and there is also a KYC verification for these policies or for an insurance policy every year. But there are always some lacunae in the policy. I will not say lacunae, but there are some rules in the policy which are actually for the benefit of the consumers, which can be taken advantage of.
Right.
Let me give an example. Yeah. For example, for every insurance policy, when you take an insurance policy from any of these insurance players, there is always this period of free look policy. So basically, if you don't like the policy, you can cancel the policy within a period of say 15 days from the date of issuance of the policy, or 30 or whatever is given by the bank. So sometimes what happens is that suppose some person takes a policy, then he says that I don't like the policy, so I want to cancel it. So immediately what happens is that as soon as he or she says I don't want a policy to be cancelled, the money is then given back to the person as So basically, it could be one way of converting unaccounted money and making it white, because the money then comes back to the person because the policy was cancelled. So, these are some of the typical examples whereby it could be misused, but I believe that on an overall the KYC norms in India are quite strict enough, and it is not easy to break them.
In fact, that was going to be my next question. Now, the investigation has shown brazen violation of the Income Tax Act, FEMA, RBI regulations, KYC norms like you mentioned, the Banking Act and Prevention of Money Laundering Act as well. Do our money laundering laws need to be more stringent? I think you answered that questions, but do you think the existing norms are strict enough and adhere to international best practices, or do you think some tweaking we could do with?
See, I mean, you can see Indian money laundering norms. You have a well-established money laundering norm. There is also separate, I think, reporting system, which is an institution in Delhi where every organization, insurance or other players, will have to report to them. But yes, money laundering is a menace and which has to be carved into significantly. And for an example is that there has been a phenomenon transition through regions. If I give an example, before the 2001 world terrorist attack, there was a lot of money laundering activities in these developed countries. And then the US came out very strict, it came some regulations. Then the money flown to the Middle East. Then the Middle East became very particular. Then the money, currently money laundering activities are actually getting into the African region. Now the African countries are also establishing a set of money laundering rules. As far as India is concerned, we have a separate money laundering system. They are very strict enough, but sometimes it is possible that there could be some localized, violations, for which you cannot blame the banking system as a whole.
So they might be exploring loopholes on an individual basis. So it will be wrong to really, club the banks altogether and saying, look.
Because for example, if a person comes and makes a free look cancellation, a person cannot come and make it twice or thrice, because whenever he makes it twice, that will be reported, that exception will be reported to the institution in Delhi. So it's wrong to blame the banking system, but yes, there could be always some localized conduits which could be facilitated in this.
Let's look at the bigger picture now. Comments are coming from all over the world right now. Now, bank stocks really tanked after this news came out, especially these three banks, HDFC, ICICI and Axis Bank. They did recover on some other reason, but this is going to have an adverse impact on the financial sector as a whole, do you think? Also, Goldman Sachs has come up with a report and a statement saying that this could affect investments in India as well as lead to slower growth in private banking sector in India. Your thoughts on that?
No, I don't believe in that, because there is a report which talks about the AML ranking of different countries. If you look at the India ranking over there, India is not placed at the top, but India is actually significantly higher than most of the other African countries. So I don't think these AML violations or whatever report has been, that is going to impact the private banking entry into the country. So I think that's a wishful thinking, but yes, I agree with the point that there could be some loopholes within the system which could be exploited by some agents for their own purpose. Another example which I give to, whenever an insurance policy, some agent takes the money for a cancellation, that is sometimes money which is given in cash. There is some policy in some institutions where the money is given in cash. So basically that could again be a conduit of illegal money laundering.
So you're saying this is not really a general incident, it's an isolated incident, it won't lead to slow growth in banks?
No, I don't think so.
On that note, sir, we'll take another short break. We'll come back with the third story. Nalco, of course, has been divested. Some shares have been divested. There was a stake sale by the government. We'll talk about that when we come back on the other side of this break. Keep watching Policy Watch. Welcome back to Policy Watch. An empowered group of ministers, or EGOM, on disinvestment headed by Finance Minister P. Chidambaram had cleared the stake sale of 25.77 crore shares, or up to 10% in Nalco, through the offer for sale or OFS. The government had fixed the floor price for up to 10% share auction for Nalco at ₹40 apiece. The Nalco public offer was fully subscribed before the close of market hours last Friday, guaranteeing at least ₹515 crore to the government from the stake sale. The Department of Disinvestment, or DOD, has held roadshows in Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan and US and the UK last month for disinvestment of the straight-run aluminium company. At present, the government holds about 87.15% stake in Nalco. The stake sale was deferred in November last year as the government wanted to wait for the company's third quarter earnings to get a better valuation. Dr. Ghosh, Nalco was supposed to be one of the better bets in the divestment basket this year around. Now estimates say that it was oversubscribed through OFS. Estimates also saying over 500 crores will be garnered from Nalco. Does this mean that this year's disinvestment target, which is around 30,000 crore for this particular fiscal, that target looks within range right now? Or do you think this is a Nalco-specific excitement in the market?
No, I think this year's disinvestment target, which I have actually talked about a long time back, if the government goes to the disinvestment target, is not that significantly higher. So 30,000 crore, I think this year is going to be achieved. And I believe that what is going to be more challenging is next year, when the government is actually budgeting a 133% or something increase in the disinvestment receipt from the revised amount.
Right.
So basically that is going to be a challenge next year, because the figure is around close to 56,000 crore. So my concern is not about this year. My concern is next year, when the target actually is significantly higher.
But do you think, since the government has increased that target, do you think they have enough big ticket offers there?
See, I think there are some options which the government can actually think of. SUTs, I don't know how the government is going to the SUT route and like this, because there is a lot of offers, and that alone can fetch a significant amount from the market. But I think the government has some amount, and it has already discussed. Chidambaram has already said that we are going to be very aggressive, and I believe that if that target is made, and also the fact that the non-tax revenue target is also at a significantly 33% growth rate, but I think that could also be achieved, because the government is looking at a spectrum fee of around 40,000 crores as a license fee or something. So I think if that, so combined with this one and that spectrum numbers, even if we are able to achieve say 90 to 95% of the target next year, I think we are for a very good deficit number
next year.
Disinvestment.
One last question, Dr. Ghosh. This particular year, Nalco has been done now. Apart from Nalco, do you see, what excites you more in the divestment basket? Any other offers that you think could garner a fantastic market response?
I think that currently there are only 15 days left, so I'm not sure whether there is anything significant
that could come out.
Could come up in the next 15 days, because the year is coming to a close in this fiscal year. So I'm not sure from that point of view. But anyway, I think that this year's target is not going to be, maybe there will be not a significant shortfall from this year's target. But what is the government is going to do next year is that it may be very aggressive on the stake sales, starting from a earlier year than expected. Because the entire objective of the government of that, and this Nalco program, why it was successful was the market was buoyant. And a large part of this buoyancy also was because of the deficit numbers in the budget, which actually showed that it was able to rein in at 5.2%, which was actually an overachievement if you look at, if you see what was the doomsday prediction some time back. So from that point of view, I think it was a carefully crafted state by the Finance Ministry of actually getting the disinvestment after the budget, so that it revived a significant stake sale.
And it got the response.
And it got the response as it deserved.
Right. On that note, sir, I must thank you and say goodbye to our viewers. That, of course, was Dr. Soumyakanti Ghosh, leading a think tank, ICRIER, he works for now. Our top story today on Policy Watch, of course, was the industrial production numbers for January. They have shown a 2.4% increase after falling for 2 previous months. Now, that, of course, cannot be termed a complete recovery, but yes, it is a positive sign for the economy as a whole. Our second story, of course, on Policy Watch was the big expose by an online magazine about money laundering and accusing 3 leading private banks of facilitating money laundering, at least their employees also. My guest seems to think that it can't be generalized. Perhaps there are loopholes that exist, and some individuals, of course, might be exploring those loopholes, but generalizing and saying that banks indulge in money laundering perhaps would be a bit of a stretch. Our third story on Policy Watch this week was Nalco and its stake sale. Now, estimates have shown that over 500 crore might be garnered by the government from this stake sale. Market, of course, response was really good. This, of course, was the last big ticket sale this fiscal. My guest thinks that next year, the next fiscal, could perhaps bring better, streamlining by the government. They might start early, start divesting early, and because they've increased the target, they've already announced that they'll have a better strategy in place. We'll have to wait and watch how that turns out next fiscal. Only 15 days to go. All we have on Policy Watch this week. Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.